Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for a special conversation with producer Ophelia Harutyunyan. She'll be joining us to discuss her new feature documentary, Crazy Not Insane, directed by Alex Gibney. The film will debut on HBO and HBO Max this Wednesday. Hopefully, all of you out there have had a chance to watch the film from the screeners that we sent out. Just to give you a bit of a background, Ophelia is a Brooklyn-based documentary and fiction filmmaker from Armenia. Most recently, she, alongside Alex Gibney and Suzanne Hillinger, directed and produced the documentary Totally Under Control about the American government's failed response to the COVID-19 pandemic. She was the associate producer of the Emmy-nominated The Inventor, Out for Blood in Silicon Valley, and Citizen K. Her films have played at notable film festivals like Venice, Sundance, Toronto, South by Southwest, IDFA, and Clermont-Ferrand. So, Ophelia, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about this movie.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, the movies that I just listed from your resume really do span quite a range of subject matter. So before we really get into Crazy Not Insane, I am curious to know a little bit about the decision-making process in terms of the subjects that you guys decide to tackle, because it's really interesting how, there isn't sort of like any one thing that that Gibney focuses on. I feel like there's such a wide range of interests, and I'm curious if you could walk us through the past few years of your life leading up to this and the decision to tackle this story.
Yeah, I think some people who watched Crazy Not Insane would say that this is a very different Alex Gibney film. This is his second film about a woman, first one being about Elizabeth Holmes. But I think it really, I don't want to speak for Alex, but I could say that maybe he obviously has, if you look at his films, he is interested in, fraud and systemic fraud of government and companies and corporations. If you look at Enron or Taxi to the Dark Side, I think that is a very much, if you would ask someone what's an Alex Gibney movie, someone would give you maybe those. I think The Inventor, Out for Blood in Silicon Valley was it was about a woman, but it was about fraud again, but it was also about, we did try to look into the psychology and the psychiatry psychology behind Elizabeth Holmes and trying to understand what was going on in her head. But for me, I started as Alex's assistant. So when I was transitioning from assistant to, working on his films, The Inventor was the first film that I worked on. And I was fascinated by the subject, and I honestly couldn't have guessed how much of a cultural phenomenon it would have been, turned into, because when the film premiered and everyone was like live tweeting, I was really amazed that there was so much interest in the story. But at the same time, I was working on Citizen K, which was honestly was closer to me. I could say I was more interested in working on Citizen K just because it was about a Russian oligarch, and I am from, a post-Soviet country. I speak the language. I knew the character, which most people in America don't know who Mikhail Khodorkovsky is. And so I was very much interested in that subject because as a kid, I watched him on TV behind those bars, and I was very curious to how he got there. So I was very lucky, honestly, to have the opportunity to work on these films because I was genuinely interested in the topics. And then when Crazy Not Insane, with this one, we were working on this one since 2016. It was in development for a very, very long time. So while I was working on Citizen K and on The Inventor, and while Alex was working on a million other things, we would find time to kind of go and film with Dorothy a little bit. And then, import the footage, maybe cut a little clip here and there, and then maybe 2-3 months later go film with Dorothy again. And so this one was in the works for a very long time. And even though the subject is very different from what we've done in the past, it was really, we really worked on this one because of how fascinating Dorothy was. And just when you find a character like that, you've got to make a documentary about them. So I think the decision making about what movies to work on, what topics to cover, are just, each time it's different. It's yeah.
And how specifically did you first come into contact with Dorothy?
Yeah, so Jigsaw was doing development for a fiction series. Our development head, Joey Mara, at the time with his team was looking into, and he's a producer on this film. Laura Dern was interested in playing a psychiatrist who interviews people on the death row. And so we started doing research, and it's impossible to do research about that topic and not run into Dorothy's work. She has a fascinating book called Guilty by Reason of Insanity. It is fascinating and terrifying. I was scared for a very long time after reading the book. But we read the book, we did some research about her, and we reached out to her, and we asked if we could meet, and she said yes. And when we met with her, she came with her VHS tapes, and we had to find a VHS player. And she played us these tapes of her patients that she had gotten permission to film for educational reasons. And they were just mind-blowing. I mean, we were just looking at people and getting an insight into very dangerous people's minds. And that to us was really, it was fascinating. And so the intention in the beginning was just to kind of work with her as a consultant for the fiction thing. But then very soon, Alex realized that he wants to also make a documentary about her, because she just isn't. It's not just her stories; it's who she is. Like, she's just such a fascinating character that, and she opens up, and her jokes are just so dark, and she's just wonderful. And so we decided to make a doc about her. Yeah.
With so many of those interviews were recorded for a purpose that's not, for broadcasting to the world, right? So I'm curious to know what the process was like of using that material for a different purpose.
Yeah, so we had to consult with our legal counsel, obviously, and some of the footage that is in the film was already presented in court, so it was out there in the world. Some of it, we actually, like, for people who were living, like, for example, there is a child patient that's in the film. We reached out to her and got permission to use that footage. For some of the people that have already passed, and it was 30-40 years ago, the legal counsel decided that it's okay to use because they were part of a case. So there were different reasons why we could use the footage. But let me tell you this, we only used maybe 10-15% of what we were presented with. I mean, she had so much more. And for different reasons, obviously we couldn't use all of it. We ended up with the ones that we ended up with, and there's still a treasure trove out there.
Do things get any more complicated when it comes to be a figure like Ted Bundy that's far more publicly known, and his story has been told, in fact, a few times recently?
Far more complicated in what sense?
I guess in presenting material that rights, might belong. I mean, I don't know how that works,
right.
But there's more people probably invested in how his story is told.
Yeah, I mean, with Ted Bundy, honestly, we have cases in the film that were so much harder to find archival for, that we were like, we wish there was court footage of this, right? I mean, we have David Wilson, and we worked with a local researcher in Louisiana who would go to courts every day and ask for materials, and we finally found a CD with the crime photos, and it was just so hard to find materials, just because also these cases were like 30, 40 years back, 50, some of them. With Ted Bundy, there's so much material. It is absolutely, it's insane how much footage, like real, proper, good footage of him there is, which is honestly, it's sad. I mean, the media was obsessed with him. And so there's a lot of that. But what we didn't have was the equivalent of what we had with the other patients of Dorothy on videotape interviewing Ted Bundy. We didn't have that. She wasn't doing that back then. But we did have the audio tape of the last, like the day before his execution. She did that 3-4 hour interview with him. And so we found 2 of the 3 tapes. We still haven't found the 3rd one, but there's a transcript. And that interview is very insightful because it was the day before he was going to die. So he did open up about a lot of the things that he never talked about to anyone else. But with Bundy, there's definitely more interest, and there isn't a lot that hasn't been covered with Bundy. I think that is the challenging thing. And we did think for some time whether to include him or not in the film. But the reason we did was because Bundy is such an important character for her. She's still kind of low-key obsessed with that case because she still hasn't cracked it. And so it's the case that's haunting her, basically, because she still has so many questions about him. And even with this whole, I mean, spoiler alert, I hope you guys have seen the film, but with the DNA test, I mean, we had to go through a lot to get that sample and get it, and get the DNA and see, and get multiple experts look at it and see if there's incest in the family, because she was set on that she was sure that there must have been incest. And then when we found out that there wasn't, she had a hard time taking the news for some time. And I think, it comes to, because for years she has been looking, and she's been asking this question. So Bundy was a tricky one for sure, for those reasons. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the executioner, who
Yes.
is, it really makes up one of the most compelling parts of the film. That's obviously a much different scenario than some of the other, people that are chronicled in terms of their pathology.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything particular? Okay, first of all, did you guys go there based on what Dorothy was telling you? Like, how did you arrive to that as a story decision?
So Sam Jones, which is his pseudonym, it's not his real name, but that's what he would call himself for the media. Sam Jones, we saw that tape pretty early on. She showed it to us, and it was quite shocking with the whole like paintings and how oblivious he was to what he was doing and how that was affecting him. And so we were really interested in him. There were 2 cameras, if you pay attention in the film. There are 2 cameras. One is, it's Catherine Yeager is filming. The other one is a filmmaker that Dorothy had recruited. I spoke with him about Sam Jones too, and he had actually gone and later and talked to Sam Jones further. As a filmmaker, he was interested in him. So he shared some interesting stories about him, and the conclusion that we came to was a combination, basically. And there were some articles about him out there, but we also heard the stories from the filmmaker, but also from Dorothy. And I think what she gets to is pretty close, I think, to what is happening in there. I think it is fascinating how he doesn't look at pulling the plug and killing someone as killing. And he doesn't quite understand what that's doing to him, and it definitely was affecting him. We know enough to know that it was definitely affecting him. He unfortunately has passed, so we were never able to talk to him. But that is quite an interesting story, I will say, to dig into just the idea of being an executioner, and doing it more than once or twice, doing it so many times, and just looking at it as a job.
This does bring up, I guess, the central question about the structure of the film, which is how much of it is sort of dictated by chronological events that Dorothy's narrating to you
Mhm.
versus, you know, kind of finding things here and there and then deciding, okay, this is the story, this is the component of her work that we want to talk about at this point. Um, you know, I guess the question is really filmmaker versus subject, because it's
Mhm.
so directly about her career. Um, you know, was she particularly guiding the project in that sense, or
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure there's a million other cases that didn't get looked at. So
Yeah. Dorothy was very hard to edit. Our editor was pulling his hair every day because she's not a linear storyteller.
mm,
She will jump around. So she would talk about something and then remember something else and tell that story and then go to another story and then come back to this one, so which made it extremely hard to edit. But she wasn't guiding us in that sense where she was telling us a linear story of this is where I started, this is how I got here, and then this case happened, and then my thinking changed this way. We had to find that. It was challenging to find a kind of the storyline and the structure of the film. We did try to stick to some kind of a timeline of how she perceived things. For example, we started with Marie Moore because that was the first case where she realized she's looking at a person who has multiple personality disorder. And then we go to Shawcross to show her first case where she really was butchered on the stand and she had a hard time to understand that this is not an easy job to do, and the things that she had to go through. So there was some kind of a linear timeline there, but we still had to make decisions. Where does Sam Jones go, or where does David Wilson go? So in a way, that's why you see kind of these graphical intros to each case to kind of hint that, hey, we're going into another case, because we did struggle to, it was not a normal film where, and then this happened and then that happened kind of, and you follow the story. You really had to present the new cases and explain why this was an important case in her life.
you also have a lot of, I mean, you have some good interviews here that are people forcefully contradicting the validity of the the
Mm-hmm.
technology, uh, to this day, which is just reminds everyone that this is still very hotly contested
Yes.
in the field. Tell us about those interviews. When did you shoot them? How much? I mean, were you a believer in the science? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
where did you fall along those lines?
So yeah, we have Pardeets in the film who was on a lot of the cases that she was on the other side. He was on the side of the prosecution, and he does not believe that dissociative identity disorder exists. And we felt it was important to interview him to see the other side as well, but also because he was such an important character in her life. She does mention him quite some time, and so it was important for us to reach out and talk to him and hear him out. For us, it was important to make up our minds whether we believe in DID or not. And I would say it. Obviously, you're only seeing 2 hours of this, so it might be harder for you to. I'm sorry. So you're seeing 2 hours of the film is 2 hours, so I hope that the audiences can make up their minds about this. But if you're having a hard time, I can understand that. We watched hours and hours and hours of footage. I broke down in tears watching some of her patients, just seeing what they're going through. And for me, there was no question in my mind that this was thing, not just from watching the tapes, but also just I called up people who currently work with DID patients. I needed to make sure that I am 100% certain that this is real, that there, and I would listen to a doctor say, yes, every day I treat patients who I see people, and I would ask her, then why is there still skepticism? Why is this still contested? And she's like, because people who have not seen patients who have DID, people who haven't treated people, they just don't, to them it's this kind of magical I don't know, made up thing. But when you really meet a person who has DID, and when you really treat a patient, it is impossible not to believe in that. And so in our minds, everyone working on the film, we knew DID was real. Whether, you know, every case that Dorothy, I mean, it so happened that the cases that we chose in the end to show were DID cases, most of them, and Bundy obviously was contested, but obviously she saw people with other issues as well. I am forgetting what the question was, but did I answer it?
Yeah, well, I mean, mostly just sort of talking about the skepticism from the medical, from
Oh
some.
yeah, and why we spoke to people who were, the people who are on the other side. And part, I mean, Dr. Dietz, he says DID is not real. It's not. And so I am not sure how a psychiatrist with so many years of experience hasn't been interested, I guess, in now. I don't know. I mean, he is very firm in his beliefs that it's not real. And that is fascinating that, you know, two specialists who are extremely experienced can have very different opinions about a disease.
How would you say it's playing out in actual death row cases?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, honestly, like the insanity plea is brought up in court only 1% of the time, and it's extremely rare. And it's not like, you know, it's not like everyone just pleads insane and they're like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. That's not the case. It's extremely rare because also counsel knows that it's extremely hard to prove that. I don't know honestly currently what the statistics are for DID, but it's still very, very
Well, I just think, you know, because of the courtroom section in the beginning, you know, where it doesn't go well.
yeah.
I'm curious, like, if she feels that this has been an issue that's sort of achieved a certain amount of traction within the law, into within the medical field.
You would think that by now the law would have kind of caught up with medicine and psychiatry, but unfortunately it isn't caught up. When we were making this film, there was a case in front of the Supreme Court that was about, so basically there are some states in the American, in the USA that are not allowing the insanity plea. That you can't plead insane, right? And there was a case in front of the Supreme Court to decide whether that's constitutional or not. And when we finished the film, it was still, the court hasn't heard the case yet. And I was looking up yesterday, I was recently, and I was interested, and it turns out they found it, it's fine. It's okay to not even allow that in some states. And so that's troubling, because that means that there are states out there who think that you are responsible for a crime that you committed, whether you're insane or not, whether you are capable to make decisions or not. And that's really scary. And so, you know, I think, unfortunately, no. I mean, the law hasn't caught up with science and medicine. And the issue, I just want to make sure that people understand that not everyone who has DID obviously is dangerous. I mean, there are very functioning, high functioning people with DID. If you treat it, you can, you know, find a way to live with your alters, as long as the alters are aware, everyone is aware of what the other one is doing. You know, it's dangerous. I wouldn't want anyone to think that if a person has DID, then they're dangerous. It's really the combination of, you know, the brain damage and some kind of a, you know, a psychiatric issue and the early on abuse that, you know, coupled all of this together can make a very dangerous person. So, sorry.
I just, you may not know the answer to this, but I'm curious if Dorothy ever expressed her opinions about how it's been represented in pop culture. We've seen stuff
Yeah,
like horror
Sibel.
films like
Sibel.
Split, and we've also seen the United States of Terra, which is
Mm,
which is not about a dangerous criminal, but about a family.
yeah.
Did she have any thoughts as to sort of the misrepresentation or what's
Yeah.
actually?
I'm trying to remember if we talked about this a lot. I know that in the 70s, it was a big phenomenon, and they made a lot of movies about it. We did kind of look into it briefly, and I think I can't remember why we didn't really. I can't remember any meaningful conversations with Dorothy about it that I would comment on. Yeah.
I'm sure you had a lot more material than you wound up using. Was there anything particularly, um, I guess, not critical enough that it, because it's not in the film, but
Hmm.
something that you particularly cared about that just didn't wind up finding its right space in the movie?
Let me think. There was a character who was extremely fascinating, and my brain would hurt from watching his tapes. A big psychopath, and he was a serial killer. His crimes gave me nightmares. I had read about what he had done, and it was just brutal and gruesome, and it was just terrible. And but his tape was extremely interesting, just because it really gave you a sense of a person who he just would not let Dorothy speak. It was a fascinating tape. We didn't end up using him for legal reasons. He's still alive, and he's in jail. He's waiting for his execution, and we there was going to be too much of a hassle to get his tapes to get it worked. But he was anti-Dorothy. He was also just extremely upset with Dorothy that she thought he wasn't normal. He was convinced that he's normal, there's nothing wrong with him, and he was upset with Dorothy that she didn't think so. He had written a letter to one of the judges on another case that Dorothy was testifying for to discredit her. He went to that extent. He hated her so much. He was a fascinating character, but yeah, we couldn't include him in the film for legal reasons.
I'm curious before we start taking audience questions, um, because you were the associate producer on the films that we mentioned before, but you're the full-blown producer of this film.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that step up and sort of what the additional responsibilities and work are? Because we do have a lot of people in our program who go into documentary,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just really curious about that journey, because it's obviously now you're in charge. So what's what's the leap that happens at that point?
Yeah, I think when we started working on this, I was still Alex's assistant, and so I volunteered to work on the development of this. And so I would, in my spare time, I would research and I would read up, and I showed initiative that I was interested in the story. And so when we were working on The Inventor and Citizen K, when Jigsaw realized they needed to film with Dorothy, I again volunteered, and I was like, I'm interested. I volunteer my time? Can I work on this? And so I started, organizing the shoots, and I would be there on set. I developed a relationship with Dorothy. So when the time came when, we cut a sizzle to get funding for it, and when we got the funding, I was finishing on The Inventor and Citizen K. And when, they were looking for a producer for it, it was kind of and I had hopefully done a good job on on The Inventor and Citizen K, that I kind of was like, I would love to do it. And they saw the potential in me, and they trusted in me that I could do it. I think for me, I also would say that I wasn't a straight out of college assistant for Alex. I had done, I went to grad school and I studied film, and I graduated. I was much older than the other assistants would be, maybe, some are in their early 20s. I was in my late 20s, and so I also brought with me the experience that I had from working on fiction films. Most of them short films and some of them student films, but they still had a larger crew than documentaries do. I mean, I knew how to run a 30, 40 person crew, let's say. I knew how to schedule a shoot, those technicalities, but by being an associate producer, I also learned how to do research and archival research and how to do pre-interviews. So those skills combined, I was able to kind of present the case that I can produce this, and Jigsaw so the potential interested in me. So that was kind of my way of doing it. I'm not sure there isn't one way of obviously getting to produce something, but that's my trajectory.
I also wanted to quickly ask you about the animation.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about the I guess the process of deciding on the style of animation, how much you were going to use it, what conversations like that were about.
Yeah, it was my first time working with animation, and it was a lot of fun, but it was so different. And so I learned so much. And, I now know what rotoscoping is, and I didn't know what that was. And so it was really great. But so Nick Gibney did the animations. He was the head animator, and we recruited Nick pretty early on when we were still kind of working on the sizzle, and we wanted to include the animation component in the sizzle so that when the execs watch it, they know that this is going to be part of the film. They know the look, and so we worked on the animatics, and pretty early on we decided to do this kind of black on paper, ink on paper kind of, or charcoal on paper look, and weirdly enough, this was before we saw Dorothy's paintings. A lot of people think it's the other way, that we saw the Dorothy's paintings and then did that style of animation. It was really inspired by what she said, her note taking. She is an extensive note taker, and so she has stacks of notes, and she draws. Sometimes she told us that sometimes when she doesn't want people to be able to read her notes and know what she's talking about, she will draw something that she will know what it is, but someone else won't. And so that was the idea. We took that and kind of turned it into the animation. But also the idea was that these are her memories, that these are from her perspective. This is how she remembers them. And so we wanted to kind of stick to that rule as well. And the animation was also doing one major thing was that, I mean, a lot of her stories were amazing, but we didn't have anything to cover those stories. So like her story with Marie Moore is fascinating, but we don't have any photos, we don't have any footage. And so that was also another kind of, it was a creative way to cover it and make it visually interesting.
I want to open it up. So I should have said this at the beginning, but if anyone wants to ask a question, just put it in the Q&A field at the bottom of your Zoom panel. And I'm going to invite you over as a panelist momentarily, so that if you'd like to, you can turn your camera on and ask your question directly. Don't feel pressured. You can only, I can't turn the camera on for you. So if you'd rather just ask your question, just turn on your mic at that point. So Diane Tucker, I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this, not having said that at the start, but I'm going to move you over, and hopefully you're happy to join us. But if not, again, just use your mic. Hello, Diane.
Hi, I'm happy to come on. Thank you. I wasn't once before, and I realized I had to prepare myself. Anyway, thank you for the very interesting film, and thanks, Alex, for taking. Actually, if you don't mind, I have a couple questions. One did actually refer to the animation, and was it genuinely? And I obviously asked before you, Alex asked the great question, but I mean, is there any kind of sort of stylistic similarity that you see in terms of like there being this idea that we all create our realities, and because there is a way in which her own work to sort of, using figurative drawing to sort of present the world. I don't know if you saw any kind of similarity in that.
Yeah, we definitely kind of took some liberties with it. We were saying, hey, this is a memory, but it's also her memory. It doesn't necessarily have to be the way it really happened, but it's just how she remembers. And so, the Bundy stuff is quite trippy. When we saw the first pass that our animators did, we were like, this is weird, we like it. I mean, the Bundy section was like a whole other world, but the stuff with Dorothy and like Marie Moore and the David Wilson on the stand, we were playing with, like, if you look again at David Wilson's, the audience in the court kind of disappears at some point, and also the ending of the film with Dorothy kind of being the executioner, but also being executioned and also being the viewer. I don't know if you noticed that. I mean, Dorothy is watching herself get executed, but also executing herself. That was all kind of, we were trying to find a way to bring it all to a full circle of just like, okay, there are multiple versions of Dorothy, and in a way she has her alters too. And so, yeah, we just kind of got creative with it and just went with whatever came to our minds.
And if you don't mind my asking a quick, not follow-up, but separate question, which was, you mentioned having used only a small portion of the total available footage, but 100% of your sample did show all children having experienced extreme physical abuse as children contributed to their dissociative disorder. If you had sampled, I mean, is that sort of, should we as viewers understand that to be 100% sort of accurate representative sample? So for example, would the other footage, the footage you omitted, would it have told a different story about actually the origin of serial murdering, or would it,
Yeah, there were some cases where a person developed these symptoms, not the DID symptoms, but some mental issues after a car crash or some kind of a traumatic, kind of like a physical hit on their head where they actually got brain damage, or they had a tumor growing in their head. And so there were some cases, I mean, those can't remember if we had the tapes for those, but we definitely read about cases where people develop some symptoms later in life. But a majority of the cases that we looked into, they all shared that trait, that they were all abused as children. And DID, and I'm not an expert on DID, but if I remember correctly, DID kind of shows itself pretty early in when people are kids, when people are children, and it is a result of a child trying to kind of shield themselves from physical external abuse, and in a way kind of creating a person who takes all the pain, and so the person basically doesn't remember everything that's happening to them that's bad.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else want to jump in and ask a question? I know that sometimes it can be slow to get started, but well, I actually have a sort of a silly question, but this is your second film you're releasing in what, a month, right? How many more have you got?
Yeah, the timing of these two worked out. I mean, I asked Alex, is this what it's like to be you? Because he had a lot of films this year, but we actually finished Crazy Not Insane in January. We were going to premiere it at South by Southwest, and then COVID happened, and so the film was finished. It was ready to air, but it was, because of COVID, we were still figuring out what, are we doing more festivals? What's going to happen to the festivals? What are we doing? It was still a big question mark until things settled a little bit, and then we got into Venice and to other, DAC NYC, and then all these other festivals, and then HBO scheduled it for November. Whereas with Totally Under Control, we started in May and finished it in November. And so that one was on a very fast timeline. Crazy Not Insane took 4 years to make, and Totally Under Control 5 months. And so it just so happened that these two films, yes, are coming out a month apart, but very different films, very different timelines. Yeah. I don't have anything else that's coming out in a month.
Okay. Well, because I mean, even Silicon Valley and Citizen K, those movies came out last year, right?
Yeah, we were working on those simultaneously. So I remember we were finishing The Inventor and we were ordering Archive, and I was in London for shoots on Citizen K. So we were, 6 p.m., 7 p.m. we would finish in London, but then East Coast would wake up and I would work with East Coast. So there were some crossovers where it was a little brutal, but I think it helps when you're working on two different films, when the topic is so different, because documentaries take a long time to make. It can take a year and a half, 2 years. And so sometimes you can kind of, I'm not gonna say get tired from the subject, but when there's a different thing that you can concentrate on, it's like a nice kind of refreshing feeling. So for me, even though it was at times brutal in terms of schedule, but working on two films at the same time was actually fun.
Okay, it looks like we have a question from Sally Stein, so I'm going to move on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Sally, you're welcome to join us anytime.
Okay. First of all, I think it's an extraordinary film, and I think it should be shown in every law school to law students and also in medical schools to doctors in training, not just those in psychiatric training, because I think it also speaks to the weight of early childhood development and early childhood abuse in a way that hasn't been taken seriously before. But let me see if I can, yeah, there. But I wondered about your title, and I wondered how you came upon this title, because while I am astounded and in awe by the film, I'm less so by the title. And I know you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but also, so I actually was confused by the title and almost didn't watch it last night. I thought, well, if this is just about crazy people who are in the criminal system, do I really want to see all this blood and guts? And but it was so much more, and it was so much against the death penalty, especially for people who really do not have integrated personalities, so they can't be responsible for this alter that commits a crime, etc. So maybe you would just speak about this a bit.
Yeah. Funny enough, actually Dorothy came up with the title, and we thought it was great because I think when you understand it, and it's such a pity, you're not the first person to ask, and I don't know, maybe we could have done a better job with maybe like crazy but not insane, I don't know. But the idea is that we call people crazy, right? I mean, people can say, oh, this person is crazy, but under the eye of the law, they're not insane. So how can a person be crazy but not insane was the question that you're asking. If the person is, is mentally ill and is crazy enough, that you can call them crazy, how are they not insane for the purposes of, being able to stand trial and be executed and all of this? So those were the questions that the title is asking, and it is a common kind of idea. I think Dorothy kind of talks about it in the film a little bit, how the bar is so low to be considered insane, that you can, Park Deeds said something, when he said, I think he had a case, and Yates, she had drowned her children, and she clearly had issues. She had like 5 children or 4, I can't remember, and she one by one drowned them. She had a lot of issues, and he had a very controversial. He testified in court, but then his testimony turned out to be wrong. That he had cited something that didn't exist. It was a very controversial case for Park Deeds. He told us during the interview, she was the sickest person I had ever seen. But he said that she was sane to stand trial. in back then. So I was in my mind trying to understand, how can you say that she was the sickest person that you had ever examined and still tell the judge that yes, this person is sane to be to stand trial and later probably also to be executed. That to me was fascinating how you can kind of come to that conclusion even though you know the person is sick. But he was looking at it, he was like, that's the law. Under the law, she's sane to stand trial. And so he was sticking to the law. And I think so that's what we were trying to do with the title, that, you know, you can be really crazy, but you're not insane.
Just a quick follow-up. Did you consider just adding legally to crazy but not legally insane, but it was too many words?
Yeah, maybe too many words, but that's an interesting, yeah, that would have fixed it, I think.
But really, thank you for this.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for watching. I'm glad you ended up watching.
Oh, yes, me too. Truly. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
This next question is from Kathy Shirley. And the question is, she wanted me to read it, is, sorry, actually, I just realized that I transferred the wrong person. I got to bring Morgan back over. The question is, at the end of the day, what would you want the audience takeaway to be? Any call to action to support legislation, and much of this would surely make for a great fiction film. Is there any thought to adapting it?
Yeah, I hope that we hope that the film can start a conversation about this. Obviously, for me, you know, just the fact that the United States still has the death penalty is already kind of mind-boggling. But on top of that, killing insane people is just inhumane, and I can't believe that's 2020 and we're still doing that, and I really hope that it can start conversations. We will try to work with any groups and activists that are working on this. We're pretty tuned into this at this point, and so I think for sure, you know, death penalty, but also just understanding that, I think Dorothy said it really well, that, you know, insane people are not raging mad, and people can be very high functioning but still be considered insane clinically and legally. And so just understanding that, and also trying to understand why the crime happened and how to prevent it, and how to make sure that we don't have any more serial killers, and we don't, you know, have extremely violent people, and how we can prevent that behavior. And also just, for me personally, I also just hope that we can, you know, move away from the idea of punishing people for what they've done, in a sense of, like, I think the way the prison system works right now in America is that it's a lot about kind of maybe giving up on the person, just punishing them for the crime, and not even trying to rehabilitate and bring the person back to the society. And I think that really needs to change, because the European countries that have switched and have made that change, you know, have seen a lot of progress in that area of just not giving up on the person and really bringing them back to society. In terms of the second question about the fiction thing, I mean, the Laura Dern project that started the documentary is currently in development / pre-production. Eric Roth is writing the pilot, and it's hopefully COVID allowing could go into production soon. So it will. So there is, yes, a fiction thing in works right now.
Okay, looks like we have one last one from Hermione. So let me move you over.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi. I'm not camera ready, but hi. This is really a moving piece. It was disturbing, and I'm conflicted because I don't feel like the rights of the insane person should be more important than the victims.
Of course.
But I wanted to know, on a personal note, did you suffer any psychological effects from working on the film? And if so, how did you cope after?
Yes. I mean, I didn't see a specialist. Probably I should have, but early on when I was doing research, I did read a lot and watch a lot, and a lot of the footage and the photos were extremely disturbing. So I did have nightmares. Then they kind of went away, but then later when we were finishing the film, I kind of got the nightmares back. It was kind of weird. And one nightmare specifically was extremely vivid. I woke up in the middle of the night, terrified, and I was certain that there was someone behind the door who was coming in to kill us. And it was quite terrifying, actually. I couldn't I had to wake my partner up, and I had to tell him what was going. Actually, no, I think I didn't wake him up because I was worried about him. But then the next day, I told him, and he was like, "Why didn't you wake me up?" And I was like, "I don't know, I was scared." It was real. I'm laughing about it now, but it was terrifying, and I couldn't get over it for weeks. But it definitely gets to you. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm a soft person, but after reading all the details of the gruesome crime, and I agree, we're not trying to justify, this what the criminals did. This was a film that was trying to understand why they did what they did, and in no way we're trying to diminish the victims and the crime, obviously. But it's tricky when you're reading about what they've done, and I would catch myself sometimes just being like, Dorothy, I asked Dorothy, I was like, how could you be so, she wasn't compassionate, but how could you just look at this person and not constantly think what they had done? Because for me, reading about it and watching it, sometimes I would flip and I would be like, I don't know, maybe this person deserved to, but I just, because some of the crimes were just extremely, extremely gruesome. But I think that's what's great about Dorothy, is that she can put that aside and look at why they did what they did, look at their history, their childhood, and all of that, and without forgetting that this is a very dangerous person and she shouldn't be alone with them in a room, but also not constantly reminding herself about the crimes that they did. I think that's the only way she could do her job. And so that's what I was trying to do, of just like, okay, I need to move forward, and so I need to just maybe forget about the crime for a little bit and concentrate on the person and their history and their childhood. So yeah.
Thank you. It's really a moving piece. It's disturbing. I watched it right before this, so I'm conflicted, but it was really well done, and it's something that should be explored more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.
Johnny, you've asked a question, but without actually asking the question. Does that make sense? Why don't I just, okay, here we go. Okay, so he's conflicted about the death penalty. Can you think of any situations where someone should be put to death?
I personally don't. That's just my opinion. I don't think anyone should be put to death. I know it's hard when, I mean, there were so many mass shootings, and there was the famous Norwegian. I remember, I don't know why back then, maybe I was a teenager, but the Norwegian mass shooting that happened really affected me. And I was thinking about that, how Norway was so humane to the guy, how they took care of him, and he had killed so many children. And I used to think that a life sentence is more punishment than death penalty, just because a person has to live and with the crime that they did and think about it every day, and death penalty is a little too easy. That's when I was younger and didn't know enough, and I was a kid. But now that I've read about it a lot, and then I've also researched, and I do think that there's a lot to learn from these people. And I think Dorothy kind of famously, I mean, she said in the film too, and to us a lot of times, that she could have learned so much more from Bundy if he wasn't executed. And if anyone deserved to be executed, maybe it's Bundy, right? I mean, he just killed so many women, and it's just terrible, the crimes that he did. Yet here was Dorothy saying, you know, I could have learned so much more from him if he wasn't executed. And she's saying that because not because she's kind of fascinated by Bundy and wants to know why he did, but she wants to know why he did what he did for the future, for the other cases, so that that behavior can be prevented, so she can understand the other serial killers better. And so for that reason, I think for the scientific reason, for Dorothy's reasoning for not killing people is that's one of them. For me, I think it's just a human thing. I think we shouldn't kill, you know, just because the person did. I don't think that should be the answer. Eye for an eye is not gonna get us anywhere. Again, I do think that we can work on the person, try to bring them back to society. Maybe it's a lost cause for serial killers, but there have been people who, you know, were executed for a crime, like Johnny Garrett. He was 17 when he committed the crime, clearly mentally ill. Years later, the Supreme Court ruled that underage people cannot be executed. So if he had committed the crime 5 years later, he would have been alive, but he was executed. There are enough cases of people being executed that later turned out to be not guilty of the crime. Even if there's one person that was executed who was wrongfully, prosecuted, I would rather not kill anyone, because the idea of a person who didn't commit the crime, is innocent, getting executed for something they didn't do is just terrible. So I think that we should never execute people.
Well,
but I'm sure others disagree. So
hopefully the film will sway some people in that direction.
Hopefully, yeah.
So congratulations. It's coming out on HBO in 2 days. So everyone please get the word out. And thank you so much for joining us. I hope we can do something in person with your next one, you know,
would
so
be nice.
Back to normal. So.
Yes. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.